Thank you. Welcome to the Unleashing Innovation discussion. I'm Amy Wilkinson. I'm the CEO founder of Ingenuity. We are advancing entrepreneurial intelligence. I also teach at Stanford Graduate School of Business, and I'm the author of a book called The Creator's Code. It's an entrepreneurship book about how to create and scale breakout businesses. I am delighted to be here with such a distinguished panel of innovators across different businesses and spectrums. I'm going to give you a quick introduction and one fun fact about everyone. So we're going to start in an unconventional order. Our slides may come up. I hope they do, because we have a fun fact slide for each one. So Hilton Romanski is the SVP and Chief Development Officer at Cisco. He's responsible for engagement with startups and entrepreneurs, investing in young companies, and helping drive internal entrepreneurship at Cisco. And Hilton was named after a building in Taipei. There it is.
First of all, it's not what you think. You're at the bar later on this evening, I'll explain.
Okay. And next we've got Scott Neal, Senior Vice President, Worldwide Sales at Gulfstream Aerospace. Gulfstream is the leading manufacturer of private business jets in the world, and their most recent aircraft, I am told, is the fastest, most comfortable, and farthest reaching private jet. So I think we should all ask for a jet ride on that. Early in Scott's career, he worked with Mark Cuban on the sale of a Gulfstream aircraft, which is the largest transaction done on the internet at the time. So I actually am a nerd, and I fact-checked all of these things. Here is the Guinness Book of World Records transaction. So single largest e-commerce transaction, Mark Cuban bought a Gulfstream for $40 million in 1999. So there you go, fun fact. Yeah, congratulations. Navdeep Bains, so Canadian Minister for Innovation, Science, and Economic Development. Over the past year, he's been leading Canada's Innovation and Skills Plan, which was the centerpiece of the most recent federal budget. He's also an advocate for diversity and has recently introduced a bill to Canadian Parliament that promotes the advancement of women, cultural minorities, underrepresented groups in corporate Canada, I guess corporate context. Yep. And he's a huge LeBron James fan. I don't know if you all have fact-checked this, but at 4 p.m. today, the Raptors play against LeBron, and this makes it very hard for our minister with divided loyalties. But there he is as a Raptors fan with his family.
Just for the record, I'm wearing purple, so I'm supporting the Toronto Raptors.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure that if there's any Canadians in the audience, I don't want to send any conflicting messages.
Okay, good. Just to clarify. Okay, and then we've got Jeff Wong, so Global Chief Innovation Officer at EY, down here on the end. He joined EY in 2015. He grew up in Silicon Valley. His job is to do new things at EY and to do old things in new ways around the world. So we have a photo of Jeff. He is leading the recent EY Innovation Realized conference, which literally took place inside of a circus tent. So for all of you at Milken, there is no circus tent here. But here is our wonderful head of innovation for EY. And I think he might be an insurance risk. I'm not sure.
I'm not particularly good at following the rules, is what they'll tell me.
Okay. And last but not least, we've got Christian Nathan, and started off his career in research and development, what is today called AI. He says that it used to be a bad word then, but he's excited about AI's return to grace. He spent the last 20 years in various roles in technology and business. He joined S&P Global as Chief Information Officer a year ago. And he hopes to see the demise of email before landlines. So explain our slide here.
Oh, well, it's just as computers get smarter and smarter and AI, and they start thinking, they can also be annoying. So I thought this was a funny cartoon that sort of exemplifies that.
There you go. And one fun fact on myself that's not obvious in my bio, I launched a book called The Creator's Code. I spent 5 years interviewing the 200 top entrepreneurs in the United States. Poured my entire life into it. I had been in the White House before, spent 5 years at Harvard doing the work. It's the biggest data set in the US. And then when the book launched, as a first-time writer, I was so excited about the launch. I was in New York doing media, and I was completely overtaken by a beagle This is the Westminster Best in Show Dog. This is Miss P that had a premiere the same day that my book, The Creator's Code, did. So I don't know, and the comedy writes itself. So there you go on the panel. We're going to start with a lightning round of questions. So we pace this through pretty quickly and ask just to the panel for everyone to give, a quick 1 to 2 minute answer. The first question is unleashing innovation. Is this about business models or is this a technology question? So we'll start down here.
So from my perspective, from the government's perspective in Canada, for us, it really boils down to people. What I mean to say is that it's people that determine the ideas and find the solutions, and it's people that will benefit from it primarily. And so our view is we have to really focus on creating a culture of innovation, and that really means, we have to look at both technology and the business side of it. And from our perspective in government, we really focus on lifelong learning. So from a very young age, we put initiatives in for coding, for example, focusing particularly the disparity between young girls and boys. I've got 2 young girls, a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old that you saw in the picture that was up before. So lifelong learning in coding is an example, and digital literacy, and just learning how to learn, work integrated learning, and also a focus on adults as well when they're in the workforce to come back and have the opportunity to learn. So for us, innovation is really about people, and it's really not about a business model. It's really setting this tone and creating this culture of innovation in Canada. And we believe clearly that culture eats strategy for breakfast every single day, as Mr. Drucker would say. And if we get the right culture and we invest in people, then that really will help, I think, not only the business model, but technology.
Terrific. Krishna, how about from your perspective?
I think we often talk a lot about technology innovation being the driver, but you really can't separate the business innovation, technology innovation. Because at the end of the day, it's the business innovation that drives economic value in most cases. The technology innovation enables it. An example I like to give all the time, and I'm sure many of us in the audience still remember Blockbuster. And their fundamental business value, the business model, was based on late fees. It wasn't so much on the $2.95 or $3.95 you spent to rent the video, but it was every day that you returned it late cost you another $3 or $4. And that business model, which was dependent on me returning the thing late, was what got disrupted by Netflix and so on and so forth. So there's absolutely a technology component to the innovation, but at the end of the day, it needs to be married with the business model innovation as well.
Mm-hmm. How about from the Gulfstream perspective?
So from my perspective, I think it's more of a business model, and it's a business model that sets the conditions for employees to be innovative and contribute to the company. Gulfstream, it's business aircraft has been our only business for about 60 years. And a lot of the innovations that we have seen over time, technology or performance or otherwise, have come directly from employees. So it's creating an environment for Gulfstream where employees feel empowered and safe to give their ideas. And we have a long history of continuous improvement where employees are recognized. So I think it is for us a business model, but it's supported by people.
Mm-hmm. How about at Cisco?
Look, I think it really is, it's a combination of both in our space. And I've been at Cisco for about 17 years, and when I joined the company, you could isolate it down to a disruption in technology that was coming at you, or a market that was being disrupted by the technologies that we were a part of, and being able to simply take a feature and embed it into both your product as well as how you took it to a customer, and you could win that way. And I think that in our space today, and technology more broadly, and I would submit for all companies, every company in a sense, in my view, is becoming a technology company. It's also about business models. So, 20 years ago, nobody within the hardware space was talking about trying to get to deferred revenue models or recurring revenue. Here's the reality. We have a $10 billion, $11 billion business that we have to go and recreate every single quarter. And so for us, it really is about both of these. The ability to identify big technology transitions and go after them, and find a way to deliver the technologies in a way that our customers and our investors are going to need and expect. And so it's about both. And then I think above and beyond all of that is the ability to change. So, I think the aspect that was highlighted a couple of times around people, that's the critical element when you look at shifting your business model and your technologies. The ability to identify talent, to be able to modify talent, to be able to teach talent, develop talent, to be able to change. And as you look at some of the disruptions that are occurring across every single industry, unless you have that DNA to be able to adjust and shift, if you have a successful business, it's not going to stay successful unless you have this DNA. I think that's the most important element for companies like Cisco.
And Jeff, how about you?
So for us, we take a very broad definition of innovation. For us, it's really about being able to manage through any shift and any change. So we'll talk about fun things like artificial intelligence and blockchain and things that I'm sure will come up on this panel. But we'll also talk about disruption that comes from other areas. So no matter which side of the elections you are on, but the Trump White House, what happened in Brexit in Great Britain, what's happening in France, that is also disruption. And that's also things that cause change. And so when we think about how we manage the innovation group internally, we talk about, a lot of it is about technology, a lot of it starts there, but we also talk about how it impacts the entire firm. So not just what services we deliver, what new services can we deliver, not just how we deliver today, how should we deliver it, not just on the business model of how do we charge as we charge today as one of the large professional services firms in the world, but how could we charge sort of over the next 5 or 10 years. So when we think about innovation disruption, we think about it well beyond technology, well beyond business model, all the way up through who you hire, how you attract them, how you retain them, so how you organize your firm around it. So we think innovation should take a very broad view when it comes to large corporations.
So here's the question for those of you in large corporations or in government. How do you keep large, established entities innovative? What are the tools? What are the mechanisms? How do you keep disrupting yourselves instead of being disrupted from the outside? I'll throw it out to anyone who.
So I'll start. We think of a couple of different ways. We have a global innovation team, and we do a lot of sort of the most disruptive things on the team. But I had a good friend of mine who talked about culture once, and she told me, culture is the stories you tell and the heroes you hold high. And the fact is, at EY, we've been doing a lot of very interesting things around the world, a lot. But most of people in the audience and most of the people around the world, I think, didn't realize that we do these things. So one thing we're trying to do is talk about it a lot more. But like I said, it goes a lot beyond that. So it's not just do we talk about it to show examples that we are doing interesting things, but also when we think about who we hire, how we hire, we're looking at going to different schools, different degrees, evolving how we think about that. We also talk about how we, I think Nancy Altobello, our global head of talent, is actually in the room, so you could talk to her at the break as well, but also about how we think about reviews, how we ask the question of, is this person progressing or not? How we give feedback in terms of what they should be thinking about to advance their career. So when we think about this, we don't just think about doing experiments at the global head. We don't just think about it as doing internal marketing, talking about the things we're doing. We're trying to really integrate it into all aspects of our firm.
I'll take a shot. Look, I think fundamentally you have to use all means at your disposal, and there's a big chunk of it which is about internal innovation and trying to find ways to reward and unlock the current employee base that you have to pursue things that you think are going to be a little bit further over the horizon or around the bend from where you are as a business. And you can obviously do things to incent that behavior. So we've got projects and programs inside the company that try to get in the entire 70,000 person employee base involved in generating ideas and taking those to some form of productization. So we do that. But at the same time, I think it's really important, especially in some of these fast-moving markets, to recognize that you're not always going to be able to solve it internally. A lot of times you are, right? And you want to solve for that. You want to be able to bring great talent in that is further afield than where you currently play. But we also are reconciled with the reality, and have been for a really long time, that there's a ton of innovation that happens outside the company that you have to tango with, you have to engage with, you have to figure out a way to get access to. And whether that is directly involving yourself with startups or directly involving yourself with venture investors or becoming a venture investor, as we have become, we've tried to find different ways of engaging with innovation no matter where it is, right? So whether that is from a domain perspective, a business model point of view, geographically, today we've got a $2 billion investment portfolio that's global. It's about 100 direct investments in startups, some of which over time we will acquire, some of which over time we'll simply partner with, some of which over time will just be working in areas that are less important for us but more strategic at some point in time for us to figure out a particular problem. But it gives us insights that otherwise we wouldn't have access to. And I fundamentally believe that the markets will find disruptions that we will not. And it's important for us to find a way to touch those and bring those together with what we're doing internally with respect to some of the internal innovation efforts that we have going. And between those two things, we think that we can basically future-proof a lot of where the market's going and participate in the most exciting markets for Cisco.
Okay, so I want to ask a follow-up question there. Cisco in Silicon Valley has a little bit of a lore around acqui-hires, right? Acquiring founders for talent. So can you talk a tiny bit about that? Like how many founders do you have inside of Cisco now?
So I'll start with kind of the broader picture of build, buy, partner for the company. So as I said, one of the things that we philosophically have become reconciled with over 34 years of being a going concern is that you have to have the ability to build excellent things, and if you can do that without having to go outside, you should do it. That's the easiest, most straightforward way. It's less complicated. If you invest, that's another way by which to get visibility. On the acquisition side, we've done 194 acquisitions since our first one in 1993. They have successively gotten us into new markets, oftentimes have bolstered our position in existing markets. About 2.5 years ago, we decided to actually go back and say, well, it's fantastic that we brought this talent in, but how much of it is actually integrating with each other? So we inventoried 30 founders and CEOs who had come to Cisco through acquisitions who were still at the company leading big businesses. We brought them together and they chartered themselves. They said, look, we love what we're doing, it's fantastic, but wouldn't it be interesting for us to actually grow a capability that allows us as founders and internal entrepreneurs to go and find new projects to work on. So now we have 46, so we've been active since we made that decision to bring that team together. We have 46 founders and CEOs of companies that have come in through acquisitions. Currently, they've got 6 active projects that they chose themselves that they're advocating for with my sponsorship. And we're funding those in a way that allow us to be able to have just a different lens on how we can drive some of the talent that they brought to the table, but also now attract additional talent that they otherwise would have had access to as an external company, but now here at Cisco have the ability to bring to the table for us. So it's another way that we're trying to, again, get the benefit out of not just the technology, but the talent, the people that we bring in from these various acquisitions.
Okay, are there other points of view here?
Yeah, sure. I think you talked about a big company perspective, and I think legacy is the biggest enemy of innovation. And it could be legacy from the point of view of products that you might have, legacy from the point of view of your business model, of the organizational structure, so on and so forth, because that's what you're trying to disrupt, right? You're trying to disrupt that, and the timing of the disruption, when do you disrupt yourself, becomes really key. And the way we look at it, I think there's several axes to this. One is culture, which several people have talked about. You can't have a culture where the best ideas are expected to flow down from the C-suite, for example. So you need to have this culture that the best idea, wherever it originates, wins, right? So in order to do this, you need to have a mechanism to surface those ideas, to have the collaborative tools, the social tools, so on and so forth, to be able to surface these ideas. And that's a big area of focus for us. How do we we're in the midst of just totally revamping our intranet, if you will, to make it much, much more conducive to this sort of thing, right? Then there's the notion of you can't be an island. There is a whole lot of innovation that's happening all over the place. And you need to be aware of what's going on just simply by being plugged into what's happening. If you're oblivious to the revolution in artificial intelligence or machine learning, you're going to miss that whole innovation piece around that. So we partner. We partner with startups. We have investments in early stage companies. We just announced a partnership about a month or two ago with Kensho, which is a small, highly innovative artificial intelligence based company. So one of the things is you really have to be willing to do that, right? Yeah, if not, if you're in a situation where you're constantly thinking that you can do everything yourself, it doesn't work. Another thing I'd say is this notion of, once again, it's cultural of continuous innovation. You can't have really, really long cycles and expect to innovate, because by nature, you're going to make mistakes. And you want to make mistakes, and you want to encourage that. So you want to encourage this fail fast behavior, if you will. And we're actually instituting awards for failing fast. This might sound ironic, right? You don't want an award that encourages failure, because at the end of the day, you want to succeed. But you want to have a metric that sort of says, well, if you fail, what did you learn from it?
Right.
And did you do it quickly enough so you can go back and be introspective about this, right? So for us at S&P Global, it's you know, we, like other large established companies, we have a you know, established business models and operating models and so on and so forth. So attacking this innovation from multiple angles is how we go about it.
Okay, so let's ask a failure question. In terms of how do your organizations think about that? All failure is not equal, right? There's some catastrophic failures, there's some incremental failures. You don't really want a repeated failure. You could maybe have different kinds and keep learning. But how do you all think about failure?
So just to pick up on that from a government perspective,
Sure.
we're really risk averse when it comes to failure, because there's a political dimension to it. Obviously, from the business side, there's shareholders, there's investors, but from the political side of it, we're really risk averse. And one of the areas, again, going to the early question around innovation and how do we drive that within government, there's two dimensions to it. Again, and I like the comment about learn fast, fail fast, and never quit. I think that's such an important part of the culture that you talked about. But from a government perspective is how do we provide better services to our citizens? So that's one area that's really important for us, especially as mentioned before, the fact that we are now a digital economy and there's higher expectations, especially with the younger generation. And in order to do that, we're looking at procurement. Government as a marquee customer, and carving out 1% of our procurement for problems that we have to go out there and take risk. So it's not always about the lowest cost provider. It's about who's got the best idea, who's got the best solution, and how can the government, you know, benefit from that. And the other advantage that, or the other perspective from government is how do we use procurement to drive innovation as well. So it's not only about services we provide to our citizens, but how do we create this culture of innovation I talked about? So major acquisitions through infrastructure or through, you know, military, how can we really work with innovative companies that have new ideas, that can take risks, and that can succeed within Canada and globally as well. So those are the dimensions from a government perspective, how we deal with innovation, how do we create that culture of innovation. And we've baked in clear targets where you can take risk, because that is a challenge that we have. There's zero tolerance. I have to get up in the House of Commons and answer a question if a certain project failed and taxpayers were on the hook. So there's this real challenge within our bureaucracy, within our public service to take risks. And in order to deal with that, we set targets saying you can go out there, take risks, and this is kind of your budget, your envelope dollar value that you have. And that's an expectation we created from a public policy perspective.
You know, I think I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was going to say, in the abstract, Amy, I think it's actually, it's really hard for a large company to identify when that failure has occurred for early stage projects. Mm-hmm. I think large companies are really great at identifying when, you know, large scaled projects are either off the rails or going forward in the right way. But the venture markets, I think, are expert at trying to figure out, well, actually, that's just not working because you're not, you know, there are no customers, right? Or you're not getting to the next phase of technological innovation or business model innovation. And I think that one of the most difficult things that we have had to do is implement a framework where, look, there are just different people at the table who make that decision, right? To the extent that there are some early stage things that you're looking at, or what we call alpha projects, very, very creatively named, for things that are not the core of your business, the people at the table that make the decision about whether you are succeeding or not have to be different. They have to have a different orientation that is geared towards identifying whether the early indicators of success are there or not. And left to the devices of what's optimized for a large-scale business, you know, driving billions of dollars of revenues, it's really hard to see that. And so I think the mechanism to have that in place is as important as, you know, trying to build, in theory, the culture failing fast. You actually have to have people inside the tent who know what that looks like.
Just want to add one thing to that. I think the metrics are really important here to measure it, because you can't measure. So two things. You need to have the metrics up front, because it's just human nature that as projects go along, you tend to sort of shift the goalpost because you have so much at stake at it, you don't see it. But it's also very important to measure these new innovative projects that are disruptive very differently from an established project. And if you have the same structure of measurement, of governance, and everything else for something that's brand new and starting off, then it's going to get killed.
So how do you do that? How do you measure?
So let's say if you have an existing business and it's measured through standard P&L and the profit and growth and right, so on and so forth, and now you have a new project and it's a pilot. So the first thing you want to do is, by the way, for anything that's innovative, you have to start small. If you try and do this at the scale of the entire company, it just doesn't work, right? It's not going to. I mean, it's too much of a risk. To your point, you're not going to be able to sell it to your stakeholders, and there's way too much downside. So now, if you've identified a particular project, the way to measure this is by using, it's unconventional for large companies, but it's not for what you see every day. It's, how much mind share am I getting? How are people talking about it? Am I sort of making progress against my measurements? So it's not necessarily about, is it profitable, is it not? Am I creating an ecosystem around it which tells me that I'm gaining traction? Are people talking about this as the next big thing, even though there might not be any revenue associated with it, and that's anathema to the CFO or whomever. So you have to have a very important set of clear goals that you're trying to achieve, and agree up front, this is what we're driving for. This is what the first 6 months, 12 months, 18 months are going to be. And let's measure ourselves against those very real things. Let's not move the goalposts, but let's not use the same measurements we use against an established project. If not, you will never be able to disrupt yourself.
So Amy, we and I think everybody would agree, we think a lot of this in terms of the end user, right? So it's not, for us, it's not just if people are talking about it or not, it's about what's the users, what number of users do we have on a specific platform, concept, whatever it is. What's the feedback coming from those users? And a lot of it isn't broad metrics per se, but direct conversations that we're having with end users around their feelings and how they feel they're using it. Does it make them more productive? Is it interesting to them? Is it headed in the right direction? I also want to touch on the failure comment. I would characterize it a little bit differently for us. It's true there are failures, but and it's probably a pretty easy recharacterization to learning. It's really not about seeking out failure. Like, we really don't want to fail, but it's figuring out where that next piece of iteration or shift you need to make is. So I've been incredibly off on a lot of hypotheses I've made on all the different businesses I've started over at EY and in the previous company. But we've always been fairly secure about the markets we're going after, right? We know we're heading after billion-dollar markets, big problems, what I like to say, fairly obvious things. And so for us, it's just the pathway from here to there is fraught with shifts and changes. But I don't think we ever think about it as failure. We think about it as just learning experiences and trying to reframe the hypothesis around different things. And so for us, it's maybe a more optimistic view. And then how do you ingrain that, I think, was another part of the discussion. For us, it's just from the leadership to the teams to everywhere. I'll go in front of the EY board and talk about, here are a few things that have gone really well for us, but here are things that really we weren't right on. And we've shifted and changed, and here's how we shifted and changed. And sort of everybody's acceptance of that, from my ability to do that in front of our global board and have that be an accepted way, an accepted practice, I think we want to serve as representation to the broader firm, that you don't have to come in and have all the answers and be right every time. You come in and say, we figured some things out we didn't know before. And I think that that's the framing we like to use, because it creates, I think, a more optimistic pathway for our teams going forward.
So, Scott, I want to ask you, so you're building aircraft, right, at Gulfstream.
We are.
How do you think about this question of failure? How do you sort of build it in? Or how do you make sure that no aircraft is going to fail, but your culture is going to continue to innovate?
So I think we look at it two ways. So we look at I think we have a culture where the employees understand that it's okay to fail because it is learning, to your point. You learn from your failures. However, since we are dealing with aircraft, we can't fail at
Right.
safety. So it's a two-part story with Gulfstream, but our employees understand the safety side. Okay, there can be no exception, no compromise to safety. But when it comes to everything else, whether it's the design of the interior of the cabin or processes or systems, they understand that it's okay to fail because that's where the new ideas come from, I think, from learning about your failures. And again, we've got a very, very long history of continuous improvement. At Gulfstream, we actually have a formal process with employees where they can submit ideas. It's called Your Ideas at Work. And we have 15,000 employees at Gulfstream, roughly. Last year, employees submitted 54,000 Your Ideas at Work. And that could be anything from improving the interior of the airplane or systems or technology or redesigning office space. It could be anything. But what that translated into for the company last year was about $65 million in savings. But again, not every one of those 54,000 ideas gets
Right.
passed or put forward. So no compromise on safety, but creating a culture for employees to continuously give their ideas for innovation to make us a better company.
Terrific. So we've talked a little bit about ecosystems, or people have mentioned that word. So I want to, ask our Minister of Innovation, especially from a government perspective, to start on this. How do you build an innovation ecosystem?
So I don't think governments can prescribe or create an ecosystem. I think we have to recognize that we can create a partnership model that encourages different political actors and different people to come together. So we have the power to convene. And this is really, again, tone that was set by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in saying, look, let's have a collaborative approach to dealing with some of these challenges and problems. And one of them was around the fact that in Canada, we've had low growth in terms of our economy over the past decade. So how do we grow and create jobs? That's a political challenge, that's an economic challenge. And one of the ideas we put forward is a super cluster model. It was illustrated in the last budget. We committed $950 million for this project. And the objective is not to have a peanut butter approach. It's not designed to give every region, every town a small bit of money. It's really designed to identify 2-3 key super clusters and create that ecosystem around them. And so we have different objectives. One is that it has to include academia, has to include industry, civil society, and different orders of government. It's about the R&D that we do in Canada. We do a really good job of research and development. We do a very poor job of commercializing it. So that's one of the areas we're focusing on, how to get these ideas to market faster, how to commercialize them. But the idea is also to have large anchor firms work with their supplier base as part of this as well, have industry working closely with academia, and having an area of focus. So is it a platform technology like artificial intelligence that has an impact on so many different sectors in Canada, the financial services sector, for example, or it could be in aerospace or agriculture, auto. So are we focusing on that, or are we going to look at the traditional models around sectors? So those ecosystems depends how you define them as well. And what we've said is we're not going to prescribe it. We're going to go out there and have a competitive process, but we do want to really encourage more collaboration and more cooperation working together. And we're willing to put money to leverage more money in. And so we have clusters in Canada, we have ecosystems in Canada, so it's not like we're starting from scratch, but we want people to rethink. We want to disrupt kind of way people look at ecosystems and maybe look at it beyond simply sectors and look at it maybe as platform technology like quantum computing, for example. Now there's a lot of opportunities there in Canada, artificial intelligence, big data and analytics around that as well. So we're looking at those platform technologies as well to be maybe the key glue in some of those ecosystems and clusters.
Amy, can I hit on a specific example on ecosystems and moving an industry
great.
forward? So one fun thing is in a couple of weeks, I'm actually up in Toronto, so maybe I'll try to catch a game with you. I'm up in Toronto to talk to about innovation in the audit practice. And as I think most people would think, audit and innovation tend to be not two words you put in the same sentence. But what's most interesting is the ecosystem of people that they put in the room include companies, ourselves, the regulators from around the world, board members, so a variety of different people. And I think that the reason why we're bringing together that variety of people is that innovation can't just be about, here at EY, we've decided the audit's going to change, and here's how we're changing it so everybody follow along, because that doesn't work. So take one of sort of the most traditional sort of functions that we have, audit, and we put that type of ecosystem in the room together, and the discussion that, frankly, the regulators wanted to have, which is a surprise to me, was about how do we leapfrog the audit, and how do we think about that in a very different way. So it's just a tangible example of an ecosystem coming together and recognizing that no single part of it could ever advance it. And we know we can do the technology part of it. We already do it, frankly, in labs. It's just, do the companies want it? Can you get the regulator on board, et cetera, et cetera? So we have this sort of great set of experiments we have running, or projects we have running. So to be able to translate that realistically into the environment, into the industry, we had to have that group come together. So, and I think people across the panel probably feel that in their industry in a variety of different areas, that unless you bring all the groups together, you're just not going to make the progress that you need to make as an industry.
Amy, for us at S&P Global, if I think about the ecosystem, it starts with the customer in some sense. Because at the end of the day, the innovation, everything we're doing, that's the end result, is what impact does it have on them, right? So we spend a lot of time understanding not just what the customer requirements are in some sense, but just the changing nature of the customer. And so, for example, today we might find that an increasing number of our users, not the customers in the sense of people who buy the product, may be millennials, or that their pattern of using things are completely mobile-based. And so tomorrow, they're going to be the people purchasing it, right? Today they use it, somebody else makes a purchasing decision. But that has to be at the center of where you're innovating, because you need to understand where they're headed, right? So having the customer as a key part of your ecosystem is really important for us. And that says, okay, well, the content that we deliver, the things that we deliver, the benchmarks that we deliver, can we make sure they're being delivered on those platforms that that are going to be used in the future because of this changing demographic of the customer? Then there are the other natural constituents. What's happening in the startup industry. This is very important for us, because we are not fundamentally going to be a research organization that's working at the forefront of AI, right? As much as I talked about artificial intelligence, for example. So for us, it's to understand, okay, what's going on out there and how does it apply to us? And an area that we're applying something like this to, in a couple of areas, very concrete, is I like to talk a lot about alternative data, which essentially are proxies for traditional things that you measure. So it's.
So what's an example of alternative data?
So you might be interested in a classic example is you're looking at sales of a store, and you might compare same store sales. But what if you were to look at foot traffic in and out of the store? And you can do that using social media. You can have a camera that's sitting out there that has a box and counts the number of people who cross the box, whatever, right? Now the question is, how can you use this as a proxy for something else? And one of the things that we're working on at S&P Global Platts is, which in the oil industry, you have ships out there carrying oil, and can you figure out what is the optimal destination for this ship? And what's the economically optimal destination for the ship? And that takes into account lots of things. It takes into account something like the price that we understand well, that we understand well. But then you want to look at a whole bunch of other data, which might be, what kind of oil is it carrying? What's the grade? What's the price of that particular grade? Is there a refinery out there that can refine that and doesn't have it today, right? And if you can do these things in real time, then you have a wonderful arbitrage of you take your ship and you decide to send it while it's in the middle of the Atlantic someplace else. And that's possible using a combination of these artificial intelligence techniques, but these alternate sources of data, which aren't necessarily either proprietary to us, they just happen to be out there, but you're putting them together in a different fashion. So that would be one example.
Terrific. I want to take another slice at this ecosystems question by reframing it slightly and talking about partnerships, right? So I personally believe that life is a search for allies. You can find allies across different spectrums, right? They can be in large companies, small companies, public service, nonprofits, philanthropy, but you can reach out and find kindred spirits to build things together, right? So are there examples of how you are partnering that might be innovative or surprising?
Well, I'll speak for Gulfstream. So one of the things we do on a consistent basis is engage with our customers. And we engage with them multiple times throughout the year in a formal process, 2 processes actually. One's a customer advisory board. We meet with them twice a year and they give us input kind of on day-to-day operations at Gulfstream. What can we do better? But then we have a subset of that. It's called the Advanced Technology Customer Advisory Team. And we bring them in to Gulfstream and let them behind the curtain with a non-disclosure agreement. And they actually help us define the products for the future. And so anything from what these products need to do in terms of performance or comfort or technology or safety. It's a very formal process that we've used for many years, and our customers really have an input into what our new products look like. We wouldn't be where we are today without the input from our customers, and it's part of our culture that we've done for decades and decades.
I think that from our perspective, the complexity that exists in our customer environments today across the board, whether you're talking about private companies and enterprises, service providers, or governments, is so high that it's difficult to imagine that you can have long-term enduring success in your business unless you find a way to build very targeted ecosystems of skills, of capabilities, business models and products to deliver to those customers. And I think similar to Scott's examples with customers, we do that both at the general level where we bring together our top customers for that feedback and engagement, but increasingly are having very targeted conversations with a handful of customers in certain industries to go and build joint solutions together, right? Solutions that can be delivered both to that customer, whether it's in the connected car or automotive space or within the healthcare space. There are 2 examples of mine now that are live that ultimately can also then be delivered to other customers long term. So it's a way for them to actually build a business model with us that extends the reach and the breadth of their business. The other example is very clearly, from our vantage point, we're not going to get into certain aspects of business that actually do matter to customers, but we're not very well positioned to deliver. So we're not going to be in the consumer electronics business, as an example. And so the relationship that we've built with Apple, where these devices, right, coming into an enterprise environment just work better, right, because it's running over our infrastructure. There's code that's being shared. There's natively embedded code into iOS that allows you to be able to have a collaboration experience that you otherwise wouldn't have. And we believe that those kinds of things increasingly are going to be important for us to do, again, where we transcend the consumerization of technology into the enterprise environment.
So for us in the ecosystem question around, let's say, take AI for us, what's interesting is you'd think you'd find partners, of the same ilk, of the same size, right? So a lot of people think like, oh, we're a big company, we're going to partner with another big company. Something that I'm leading and doing is making sure that we're going all the way down to the university level and even down into the lab level. So we're partnered up with labs from different universities around the world, and say a topic like AI, we partner with R&D departments from the biggest companies as well. And so we try to really extend end to end, and what you find is that there are these amazing kindred spirits at each level of this ecosystem. So it's not just the big company wants to work with the big company. The little company actually likes working with us, and sometimes we do experiments where we don't even sign anything beyond an NDA. There's no money exchanging hands, it's anything along those lines. The second part of your question, which is one of the surprising things, the surprising thing for me is, as we all, accounting, audit, tax firm, there's the big 4. What was surprising to me was how much the big 4 had discussions where they tried to support each other, right? Which is different than you'd think, because we're pretty fierce competitors. I'm sure we have a lot of customers in the audience, and we all sit there and everyone's trying to sell each other. But what's really was meaningful to me is a lot of discussions that you hear about happening across the different firms is really everybody wanting the industry to advance together. And that was a big surprise to me, is how collaborative that spirit was. I mean, of course, you can't collaborate on certain aspects of what we do, but how collaborative that spirit was pretty remarkable. for me, and different, when you say surprising in the ecosystem.
Counterintuitive, maybe. All right, so I'm going to be a troublemaker here. You all represent big companies. I've done a lot of research on entrepreneurs, startup people. I think there's a fundamental difference between creators, innovators, disruptors, whatever you want to call entrepreneurs, because they view business as a form of intellectual debate. They will absolutely get right in your face, tell you where you're wrong, challenge, go right after it, right for the jugular, right? And in large institutions, it often feels like the drive is for consensus, not as much for dissent and originality or individuality as it is for having a group come to a consensus around a decision. So disagree with me, please. Tell me your point of view on driving innovation inside of these larger structures.
I'll speak for Gulfstream. I think we have managed to maintain a real entrepreneurial spirit within the company, even though we're a large company. When I started with Gulfstream about 23 years ago, we had maybe 4,000 employees. We have about 15,000 today. We are very happy to be part of General Dynamics, a much larger corporation. But at times in our history, we were owned by entrepreneurs earlier in the Gulfstream history. And so we have a lot of employees that have been here many, many years, like myself, that didn't forget those days. And so I still think we're fortunate to have some really strong entrepreneurial spirit within the company, even though we're part of a much larger, U.S. defense contractor in General Dynamics.
So it's a spirit, you think, that still exists
It's a
there.
spirit that still exists. That's exactly right.
So is it driven by individuals, or is it driven by, we've said, the culture? I don't, can you sort of put a finer point on that?
I think it's probably driven by the individuals that have been there a long time. Because it's, again, we're a division of a very large company with 80,000 employees around the world. But we haven't lost that kind of individual contributorship, entrepreneurial attitude that has been part of the culture for a long time.
Okay, other thoughts here?
So, this is a bit more nuanced, right? For us at S&P Global, there are parts of our business that are very regulated, and I don't know if consensus is the right word, but essentially you need the regulatory agencies, whomever they are, the SEC, so on and so forth, and you really can't go around springing surprises on them from this point of view. It just doesn't work, right? That doesn't work very well. On the other hand, the way you get around this is by empowering individuals at their level, whatever they are, to make certain decisions which are consistent with the overall thing. And that's where innovation always gets sort of stifled, right? If you need to, you'd rather at the end of the day sort of ask forgiveness rather than permission, right? So you need to be able to have these pockets of people who are empowered within the overall context. They go try things out, and it doesn't go live, doesn't go public, and so on and so forth. And so that empowerment is really important. So you understand in some parts of it, yes, at the end of the day, before it goes out, you've got to sit down and talk to a bunch of people and make sure that the regulators are okay, and take that extreme example. But it's that empowerment that I think is really key for a large company like ours.
Okay, other thoughts?
I would say that, look, I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all approach. There are parts of your business that need to run at scale, and they have to run a certain way in order for you to drive the benefits of having a predictable top, middle, and bottom line. And I think at the same time, for certain other aspects of the business, there really is a need to maintain a level of agility, of speed, of just very ruthless decision making that is endemic in more of an entrepreneurial environment. And as a company that started as a startup 34 years ago, I think that we've culturally tried to maintain those pieces. But I would say that putting the constant infusion of talent that's coming from this environment into roles where they're leading is a way that we've tried to go at this. So if you look at the makeup of the company today, it's a fifth of our workforce that has come in through startups and companies that didn't exist 10 years ago. Of the major lines of business that we have that you would characterize as growth businesses, so next generation enterprise networking as well as our security business, those are led by people who started companies 5 or 6 years ago, who came to us through acquisition. So I think it really is about making sure you've got the right talent that has that forward-leaning perspective, that entrepreneurial spirit, and teams that will come to the table because of what they represent and the ability to attract talent from across the industry, across those spaces. And then at the same time, not taking your eyes off the ball in the core of your business where you may just need to run it differently. And I think being able to do those things and differentiate what you're trying to accomplish is really important.
So I run the global innovation team at EY, obviously, and so I'm one of the teams that's given that permission to think differently and to do things differently. And I always tell my team, and I think they really take it to heart, which is do your job, don't keep it, right? And then the funny part when you're in the innovation group is if you just do your job, that's how you keep your job. But that requires you to not conform to sort of the normal processes, the normal decision-making pathways, to not make the same decisions that have been made before for sort of natural large business reasons. So I think we've been given that permission to do it, and the way that the firm has embraced that, I think, is how we've created a space, safe space within EY at the global innovation level that we're trying to spread out around innovation. The other thing I think the team does is it takes the perspective that the big company ought to win. So a little bit different from how you're thinking or your book, and so the entrepreneurs are out there. The fact is the big companies have the assets, the connectivity, oftentimes have the right ideas in the different companies I've talked to. And the really question comes down to, do you have the discipline not just being consensus driven, but being willing to dispute, but do you have the discipline around how you allocate your budget, how you hire a different type of profile that you need to have, but doesn't quite fit with the organization the way it's structured before? Are you willing to relook at your organizational structure, your compensation structure, to fit the incentive systems that fit the type of person you want to hire? Are you willing to have a dispute between the innovation team and one of your core businesses because innovation team's off running and doing something that frankly attacks the same market and maybe even talk to the same customer and does it in a very different way, but might be taking away from the cash flow and maybe change them all at the same time? It's all of that willingness, right? I call it personal discipline problems. Like, large companies end up with, you're supposed to wake up at 6 a.m. and exercise every day, but most people don't do it. When innovation and trying to do new things, what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to allow for these conversations to happen. You're allow for the budget allocation to happen a certain way and maintain that discipline. Companies often don't. But in the end, if you think about it, is for the large companies represented in this room, you ought to win, right? You have everything it takes, right? You have the ability, you have access, you have it all. So I think that's really what I think the spirit of innovation for us is just the willingness to say we're going to go over that cliff and hold hands and enjoy the ride down, and hopefully there's a soft landing somewhere.
Okay, so to wrap up this panel, I'm going to do a lightning round question, since we all have a crystal ball here, and ask the panelists one place they are looking to unleash innovation. Could be a technology, could be a specific system, could be a specific individual. Give us one place, and I'm going to start with Navdeep.
So in our budget, as you mentioned, innovation and skills was a key component in our last budget. We made a big bet on artificial intelligence. We have Jeffrey Hinton from University of Toronto. We have Yashua Bengio from Montreal. So we as a government and from a Canadian perspective believe there's a lot of opportunities here, and we think this area has a lot of potential. And so hence why we made significant investments into research, into attracting talent and retaining talent there in Canada.
Fantastic. S&P Global.
So I think for us, I'd echo this. I think everything around artificial intelligence and data, because fundamentally what we do is we don't move money around, we don't invest people's money. We essentially take data and turn it into, as we call it, essential intelligence that you can go use, and then you make your own decisions. And I think what's happening in this space today with just the explosion of data, different sources of data, and the ability to extract more out of it through AI techniques, I think really plays into what we want to do. And so for us, this is a key part. How do we drive more business value for our customers using data? So everything around big data and AI and machine learning is huge for us.
All right, how about at Gulfstream?
So Gulfstream, I'll point to a physical space, and it's a research and development campus that we built in Savannah. It's really second to none in the industry, and we've unleashed our engineers and our engineering team to really stay at the front edge of technology, whether it's vision systems or radar systems, to make the airplanes that we build safer for our customers.
Fantastic. How about at Cisco?
Yeah, I would say that similar to a few of the comments that were made earlier, around the area of AI and machine learning, I would say analytics more broadly. We've got the ability now to really point those spaces, those elements, at every aspect of the businesses that we're in. So think about that as applied artificial intelligence, applied AI, applied ML, applied analytics into what's happening at the network, which is a big part, obviously, of our business. How that is applied to collaboration, another major part of our business, and in clearly areas like security, right? Where we're the #1 player in the security space across the endpoint, the middleware, the network, and I think that as you look at that, the relevance of AI, machine learning, and analytics across all three of those spaces and many more that are inside of our portfolio is critical. So this is an area where our investment teams are spending a lot of time, where we're engaging both in terms of internal innovation, these alpha projects I talked about earlier, as well as working with startups that are really at the bleeding edge of some of this work.
So, Jeff, in any way?
A similar theme to the panel. AI, I think, as a 250,000 person, corporation or firm, around the world, AI and how machines can think more and more like humans is obviously critical to us. We'll be out there. We're looking hard at the Canadian deal, so we might be out there with you. But interesting story about AI, just for the room. We're doing a series of AI projects, big companies, small companies. We have our own lab that I run, and in the lab we said we're going to do this experiment because we're responsible for high hundreds of millions of pages of contracts, sort of different contracts. It's a good place to start with AI, right? We have a lot of this data. And I thought, okay, heck, this is an experiment. It'll take at least a year for us to get anywhere. In 90 days, we were 3 times better than the current processes. 90 days. So for me, it sort of turned that switch of AI being this theoretical great thing, it can play these video games or games, beat grandmasters and do all that thing, into the business reality of the fact that AI has return today in the enterprise. It's not just chatbots and fun things you do, with the consumer internet companies, but it has a return today. So we're looking at radically and rapidly increasing our investment there and looking at a series of ecosystem partnerships, deepening those partnerships that we have around the world.
So welcome to Toronto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be spending a lot of time there.
Exactly.
So we have a consensus, right, about AI, it appears. I will place a different bet, which is on revolutionizing human talent, right, and making people more creative and more innovative and all of that. But I thank you all for coming, and please help me thank the panelists.